Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to CSS Lesson 4. Today we're going to be talking about positioning elements. So, as I'm sure you have found out, sometimes elements are not exactly where you want them to be. And so you need to use CSS to actually position those in the right place, because it sucks when it's in the wrong place. So, as we always do, because we are an inquisitive bunch here, we're going to ask ourselves a question. Now, that question today is, how do you position elements in CSS? Now, there are 4 different positioning schemes used in CSS. The first is just the static default position. Now, when it says static, that just means that it is the position that you are going to put it just default. So that's if you don't do anything, that's where it's going to be. Now, this position : static would actually be inside of the style tag, and we'll see an example of that coming up here. So the next type is relative positioning. So this is going to be relative to that normal or static position that the elements default to. So you can move things with respect to that static or normal position that you default to. The third type is absolute positioning, which is going to move it with respect to the parent element that child element is inside of. So if you had a heading inside of a body, the body would be the parent element. If you had a list item inside of an unordered list, the unordered list would be the parent element. And we'll take a look at that in a second. The fourth type is another type of, it's fixed, it's a type of absolute positioning. You position it very similar to absolute positioning, but it will move with the browser window. So that's going to be interesting. We're going to take a look at all of these and look at an example and how they actually work. So let's go ahead and look at an example now. Alright, so let's take a look at an example here. I'm in my notepad and I got my browser open over here. So let's take a look. So as you can see here, here's my style tag, and I have some selectors and declarations in here. I've gave the unordered list a border. I've made the border, the body have no padding and no margin, and I went ahead and defined an ID here, which is the test ID, and that is that first item in my unordered list that I have here. So as you can see, that'll be this item right here, and let's go ahead and play around with some of these position attributes. So position static, again, is just this normal position that we see right here. So as you can see, it's in line with all the others, and it's nicely positioned. Just another side note is I put some breaks between each of the lines just to kind of spread them out so I can mess around with that a little bit. So let's take a look at relative positioning. So just a reminder, relative positioning means we're going to be moving relative to this position right here, this static position that we have. So if we say relative, we can then define where we want to move it using the top, left, bottom, and right properties. So interestingly enough, when we say these properties, we're not moving it to the top 0 pixels, we're moving it from the top 0 pixels. So if we take a look, if I say 20 pixels, it's not going to move up 20 pixels, it's going to move from the top 20 pixels. So if you want to take a look, as you can see, it moved down 20 pixels. In other words, 20 pixels from the top. So if I did the same thing for the left, it should move 20 pixels from the left. And as you can see, it did that. And remember, this is 20 pixels from the top and 20 pixels from the left from that normal static position that we have that it automatically defaults to. Let's take a look and see what happens if we switch this for absolute. Now remember, absolute positioning is going to position it relative to the parent element. Instead of the actual normal position, it's positioning it relative to that parent element. So if I hit Control S and refresh this, oops, that was the wrong button. Oh no. Okay. Now I refresh. Notice 20 pixels from the top absolute. Now it's over here, right? So it's 20 pixels down and 20 pixels right from not the normal position, but the position of the parent element, which is kind of interesting. That's kind of an interesting example here. So as you can see, that's a little bit different. So if we said 0 pixels, let's see where that is. Let's see where this actual origin of this parent element is. So as you can see, the origin is up here, which is like this upper left corner of my entire window right now. So that's the origin of the absolute position. If I said, I could go ahead and say 100, or let's not say 1,000, let's say 800 pixels from the top. Let's see where that goes. And it's all the way down there. So as you can see, we can move this pretty much wherever we want using absolute positioning. Let's see what happens if I do relative, though. If that changes anything. Should this change anything? Let's find out. Notice it made that space there for the for the for relative positioning, but when we do absolute, let's go ahead and take another look at that. Let's take a look. Notice it almost pretends like this item disappeared, right? It doesn't keep that space open there when we do absolute positioning, which is something to keep in mind. It kind of almost makes it seem like it's taking it out of that parent element and letting it be free, which is kind of interesting. So if we go back to relative, let's look at that one more time. Now, even though the element is all the way down here, it still leaves the space as if it were in the normal position. So kind of pay attention to that. That's something to keep track of. That can cause some issues if you aren't careful about that. So that's relative and absolute positioning. Let's take a look at another example now. Let's take a look at fixed positioning. All right, so right now I have a bunch of text here. This is lorem ipsum, which if you don't know, it's usually just a very common placeholder text. And fun fact, there was this guy Cicero, and he actually wrote it in 45 BC, and it's just used very commonly to just hold the text and kind of, not have to type in, this is a paragraph, and, copy paste that 1,000 times because it's just painful. And also, this looks kind of cool, and it looks a little bit different. So this, again, is lorem ipsum. So that's my paragraph content down here. As you can see, paragraph, and then I have all that content. So I have a heading that I labeled lorem ipsum here. And then for my paragraph, I have it positioned absolute, and then to the left 20%. So I didn't mention that, but you can actually position things with percentages and visual windows and all those sorts of things, just like when we're doing the border width and and things like that, so, and padding and margin. So those are the values can be in percentage as well. 20% is going to be 20% of this parent element. So let's take a look here. So right now I have my heading positioned in the fixed fashion. So as you can see here, it says fixed. I have the width as 17%, and it's at the top 0 pixels. So it should be at the top, and it should be in a fixed position. So let's see what happens. So as I scroll down, notice this heading scrolls down with me. It's fixed with respect to the window itself. So I positioned it in a fixed location on that window. Let's see what happens if I change this back to absolute. Oops. Give me a second. Absolute. Control S. Now, I don't want to translate this page. Nope. Scroll down, and as you can see, where'd that heading go? Oh, it's still up there. So it's absolutely positioned on the web page, not the window. Okay, so fixed is positioning it absolutely on the window that we see, right? So this window that we see, nope, again, and then you can see there. So as you can see, with position fixed, we go ahead and have it follows the window with it, whereas absolute positioning is going to be absolutely positioned on the web page, not the web window. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind. All right, so you can probably think of where that might be useful. Maybe if you had you could have somebody a button that would follow down to say back to the top. I'm sure you've seen that before. Or a buy now button where if you click on it, it'll take you to the link to purchase this item that you're reading about. All of these are interesting examples. Or maybe even a menu of some sort, some menu on the side with links to various areas. So that's where position fixed might be useful. Alright, so let's take a look at some pros and cons of relative versus absolute positioning. So if we take a look first at relative positioning, we can see that relative positioning is going to react to the changes in content. Remember, it leaves a space behind where that normal position would have been. It also reacts to changes in window size. The cons are changes of your parent element or changes of any elements may affect your overall layout, and we can also cause some overlap issues, which as you'll explore, you'll see can be a headache. Then there's absolute positioning, and this allows for precise placement of content. No matter what size the web page is, you're going to be able to place that absolutely in that web page. It also allows to push content out of the default location. Again, as we saw with that one example where we switched from relative to absolute, that content, it actually took away that content and moved it and left no space behind. Some cons can be it's very tedious to manage a lot of sections that are absolutely positioned, and moving content can be awkward if you do not manage it properly. And that goes for both, really, relative and absolute positioning. It can be very awkward to position things at times. So let's take a look at a summary of what we've learned today. So first off, we know that default position of element is static positioning. which is just what the normal position is. And that's what we have been dealing with, and now we get to change that. First one we talked about was relative positioning, which moves it relative to that static position, which is different than absolute position, which moves it relative to the parent element. Fixed, and then we talked about fixed positioning, which is a type of absolute positioning that fixes it in the window, not the web page. And just one last parting thought I wanted to bring up is that both absolute and relative positioning do not affect static and fixed items around them. Now, what I mean by that is that if you actually move things using absolute and relative positioning, static elements around them will not be affected. So they'll almost pretend like they ignore them, like they don't even exist. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Just a little parting thought. So hopefully you enjoyed this video, and I'll talk to you later.